Joining us now from Washington is Representative Fred Upton, Republican from Michigan and Chairman of the House Energy and Commerce Committee. And Chairman Upton, it is so good to see you again.
It's good to be with you too, Kathleen.
All right, U.S. gas prices are inching higher. How much longer until Americans are paying $5 a gallon?
Well, you know, already we saw a study just in the last week or two. They're about $3.80 now, I think is what I heard over the weekend, certainly in my district as well. We're actually seeing some numbers now. Increasing demand is coming. Production has stayed relatively stable. But we're expecting gas prices to creep up back to that $4 level before the end of the year and then stay there, which is why it's so important as you listen and Americans really do understand, it is supply and demand. We produce about 7 million barrels a day here in this country. We demand 19 million barrels. As long as those numbers stay the same, we are held hostage to the rest of the world. And you know, as the world economy begins to come back, and it is, we're going to see these gas prices continuing to inch up. $4 probably before the end of the year. Again, higher next year as you look at the overall trend lines of domestic production and continuing supply problems that we have.
Just how high will they go next year? I mean, could we see 5, 6, maybe 7 down the road?
Well, let's hope not, which is why it is so important. You know, as you look at Alaska, as you look at the Gulf, in the Gulf, a third of our production, a third of our supply comes from the Gulf. We're going to be having a debate this week on the House floor about permits offered by the Department of Interior. If they continue to stop or slow additional production in the Gulf, that has real long-term consequences as it relates to the price of gasoline at the pump in the years ahead.
Now, you have said that energy independence is key to national security and a strong, robust economy. So let's talk about the Keystone Pipeline bill hitting the House floor this week. The bill would set a November 1st deadline for the Obama administration's decision on whether to extend an already existing pipeline between Canada and Illinois and Oklahoma into Texas, thus allowing millions of barrels of oil supplies into the U.S. Is this pipeline of vital national interest?
Well, I think that it is. We passed this legislation through the Energy and Commerce Committee on a very strong bipartisan vote. It'll bring us up to about 1.3 million barrels a day of oil from the oil sands that are being produced in Alberta, almost doubling, in fact, the input at this point. It'll add 100,000 jobs. You know, these pipelines aren't cheap. By extending the pipeline, you're going to add 100,000 U.S. jobs. But the other thing that a lot of our detractors maybe they forget about is Canada's going to be doing this. They're going to be producing almost 4 million barrels a day before the end of this decade. And if we continue to say no, and the State Department has been reviewing this now for a couple of years, almost 3 years, if we continue to say no, guess what? It's going to go someplace else. The Chinese, they can hardly wait. You know, they can say, let's just move that pipeline to Vancouver instead through Canada. We'll put it on a ship, we'll send it there. We have to make a decision. It's either going to come here or it's going to go someplace else. For me, for I think the Congress tomorrow, when we have the vote on Tuesday afternoon, they'll say we'd rather have it come to the United States. At least the Canadians are our friends. They're our largest importer actually of oil. This will add, it'll add to their ranks in terms of what they're able to send to us as well. And it's something that we ought to do on a pretty strong bipartisan basis.
Okay, so what happens if Obama and the EPA reject this? What does it mean for the ordinary average American?
Well, again, it's supply and demand. It doesn't impact the price a lot because that oil is going to be produced anyway. But it's not going to come here. The big impact, if it doesn't come here, is that we're going to lose 100,000 jobs. You know, the steel that's produced, all of that. We're going to actually be moving a pretty good pipeline safety bill in the next couple of weeks. We're going to move it through subcommittee. In fact, this week, it'll strengthen the existing pipeline safety bill that's already on the books. So the new pipeline would be built under the new regulations that'll be envisioned with the new legislation that's moving forward. But again, if we don't move this bill, if we don't get an approval, an affirmative by the administration, the oil is going to go someplace else, and we'll just have to import more from the Middle East and other places where we get it from, rather than our friends the Canadians.
All right. Well, recently, Democratic Representative Dennis Kucinich said the pipeline would turn the U.S. into a, quote, sewer for Canadian oil. How do you respond to that?
We have thousands and thousands of miles of pipelines throughout the country already. We are getting some oil sands from Canada now. This extension of the pipeline that we're talking about will almost double what we get, up to 1.3 million barrels a day by the end of the decade. But Canada is, they're our largest importer of oil. I guess there are some that would like this just to shut it off, but we are reliant on fossil fuels. It's part of the mix today, but to turn our back on our friends, the Canadians, who are already sending this, I think would only send the price of oil up even much, much higher than what it is today.
Okay, we know that fuel prices are linked to jobs and the economy. Do you think that President Obama's energy policies will in part doom his re-election bid?
Well, jobs in the economy are a #1 issue. My state, Michigan, our unemployment in June was 10.5%. That's way too high. Our focus has to be on jobs in the economy. As a Republican, I say that, but really we need a national policy or national help in terms of the unemployment. Here's an issue, the Keystone Pipeline, where we know you talk to a lot of the unions. They're very much in favor of this legislation because they know that it's jobs. It's putting people back to work, which is one of the reasons why this legislation passed through our committee. Pretty diverse committee, by the way, Energy and Commerce Committee. We've got folks way to the left, way to the right, but it passed in our committee 3-1 because they understood the importance of connecting this pipeline to Canada and also the jobs that are going to be created, 100,000 with the building of this pipeline.
All right, and we'll be watching very closely. Chairman Fred Upton, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kathleen.